So at the start of this year, I did a list of my top 10 most anticipated movies of 2016, and this movie was at the top of that list. Everything below it hasn't been great this year. This, however, is Star Wars Rogue One. Star Wars Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Terrible title, still don't like the title, but the movie itself, well, let's get into that. This movie is directed by Gareth Edwards and is like immediately before Episode 4, like Star Wars. This is like that bit from The Crawl where it's like the rebels stole the plans to the Death Star. This is that story told out in an entire movie. It's like 2 lines in The Crawl, whole movie. I didn't know if it was going to work, but for the most part, this movie worked. So the story follows Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, who is like the daughter of the guy who basically designed the Death Star. And the rebellion are trying to recruit her to get to her dad, to get to these plans, to get the plans to the Death Star and blow it up. Because there's going to be a weapons test and they're worried. And, you know, Star Wars. Star Wars happened. This happened before it. You get the idea. It's the rebels trying to get the plans. Jyn Erso is a very, very integral part of that, so they try to recruit her. Now, the guy sent to recruit her, Cassian, played by Diego Luna, who is fantastic, by the way. He's been in the rebellion forever, since he was a kid. And he has this sort of like moral grey area, which is really cool for the rebellion, because we see them, you know, in Star Wars as like this squeaky clean rebellion, but no, that is not who they are. At this point, they're getting desperate. You know, they're doing everything that they can. They have this moral grey area, and he plays that off really, really well throughout this movie. It's like they're doing everything they can to stop this even bigger, you know, badder thing that is the Empire. And they're joined by K2SO, the newest droid in the Star Wars universe, played by Alan Tudyk. And this droid, once again, droid still in the show in Star Wars movies, he is fantastic. He's just dry. The thing is with his process, he has no filter at all. I love how that's just woven into the story, that part of his reprogram, because he was an Imperial droid, he's now a Rebellion droid, was that they couldn't reinstall his filter, I guess. So he says anything that comes into his head, which is fantastic. And some of the best comedic moments in this movie come through him. And along their way, these 3 characters are joined by a bunch of other characters. The standout amongst them, and the standout for this entire movie, Donnie Yen. Oh my god, this guy is fantastic. So he's not a Jedi or a Force user, but he like worships the Force as like a religion, and he sort of, you know, he believes that it's there to help him, and he's a, you know, blind guy, but he kicks ass in every scene he is in, whether it's dialogue, whether it's action. He is just amazing from the minute he's on the screen to the minute he's off the screen. Oh my god. Donnie Yen. Hell yes. And the other standout performance in this movie is Ben Mendelsohn as Krennic, the overall bad guy in this movie. Yes, Darth Vader was in the trailer, but if you're getting your Darth Vader hopes up, I'll get to that, but he is the main bad guy throughout this movie, and he is great. He is menacing, he's evil, he's a dick. He is an absolute dick in this movie, but he pulls it off in such a great way. It's fantastic. He's such a good actor. Love Ben Mendelsohn. Aussies represent. But now let's talk about some of the things that weren't great about this movie. The opening act is a lot of just expositional stuff. You know, you're going from planet to planet to place, meeting all these new people, and it was kind of overwhelming, that first act. Just like, where are we? Who are we meeting? What are we doing? It was kind of like that. It was just really, really quick to get you up to speed as to where the Empire is at this point, to where the Rebellion is at this point, who these new characters are, who some of these old characters possibly could be. It rushed that first act to get us up to speed. But then the second 2 acts is just action, 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 and holy crap, the action in this movie is phenomenal at points. So Gareth Edwards is probably best known for directing the new Godzilla film, which I actually really, really enjoyed that film. A lot of people had issues with it, but that's beside the point. But his use of scale is very, very important in Godzilla, and he moved that across to here. We get a great sense of scale the entire way through this movie, just how big and looming the Death Star is in this movie, and, you know, the AT-ATs and the X-Wings, and just the scale and scope of this movie. The X-Wing battles are great, the space battles are great, everything about the action side of this movie is fantastic. And I will say this, no spoilers here, Darth Vader in the movie, a wee little bit. That wee little bit, just the Vader that we deserved in the prequels, the Vader that we never really got to see in the original trilogy. This is Darth Vader as you always imagined him as a kid. Just fucking Vader. But in saying that, taking him out of the movie wouldn't detract from the other elements of this movie either. If he didn't appear in the movie at all, the rest of this movie would have been just as good without Vader. So that is a really good thing. It's just that little cherry that's on top of the sundae that is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. This was a really enjoyable movie. As a Star Wars fan, I'm definitely going back to watch this movie again. And this gives me hope for not only Star Wars prequels, because that name is fairly tainted at this point, but for these standalone anthology movies that are going to be popping up in between like the core episodic Star Wars movies that we've got going on. So we're getting, Star Wars movie, anthology movie, Star Wars anthology. This gives me hope that those movies, if you pick the right directors, if you pick the right cast, then you're gonna get some really, really good Star Wars movies. And I just loved being back in the Star Wars universe. It doesn't really matter what time period it is. Thankfully, they picked something that we're all kind of familiar with, is the Rebels trying to get the plans for the Death Star, but it felt great being back in the Star Wars universe, even though this isn't like a Star Wars episodic movie. It felt lived in and it felt real, and that is the aim of these movies, is to make you feel like you're being just chucked into the Star Wars universe at any time period, and it works and it still feels like Star Wars. So for that, they succeeded. So with all that being said, the really good cast, the awesome action, but unfortunately a pretty weak first act, I'm giving Star Wars Rogue One, a Star Wars story, still hate the name, 4 out of 5 Millennium Falcons, which aren't in this movie, thankfully. So what did you think of Rogue One, a Star Wars story? Let me know in the comments down below. Click right here for all your movie needs. And as always, guys, catch you in the next one.